Hello, everyone. Hello, everybody. This is a special edition of Focus on Liberia, where you will be tuning into the Liberian Leadership Academy, where we will be including our facilitators and our students as we talk about a very important topic. We will be talking about the purchase at Cape Mesurado pertaining to Providence Island. We have a special presentation for you. Now, there is a lot that is surrounding this purchase that we would like to discuss and talk about. So, the very first question that I would like to ask, specifically to we'll have our facilitators be presenting, and then we'll be having our students. So, the very first question, before we get started with the presentation, tell us some things surrounding the purchase at Cape Mesurado. What have you heard previously about what the purchase at Cape Mesurado, or how much information did you know about that? And we'll start with our facilitators.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Lord Lizette, facilitator Liberia Leadership Academy. So when I started my high school,
We're
when
getting
I
some
was
feedback. Can you pause for a second? Can we mute all the others? Because we're getting feedback.
Yeah, the mics are mute. The only theirs is there.
Go ahead, please.
okay, so when I was in high school, what I was taught about the Providence Island was that the name was once
Okay, I'm
called.
sorry to interrupt. I think George has them being broadcast from an open mic, so maybe they both need to be muted because George's sound is what they're using. Go ahead. Go ahead now, Zomope. Now we don't hear anything at all. Hold on.
No, George is not in. He's not in. He's
Oh,
not in.
all right, I was getting the feedback. That's what I'm saying. It sounds really bad through the.
It's coming from Lovely's mic. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Go ahead. Continue.
Okay, so while studying high school, what I was taught about Providence Island is that that particular place was once called Perseverance Island. And it was not a, we never learned much about that particular island. We also learned that the ship Elizabeth that brought the settlers came from the US straight to where we call present day Liberia, Cape Mesurado. So that that particular ship that is at Providence Island now is a sample of the ship Elizabeth. That was all I learned about Providence Island.
Thank you. Thank you, Zomope.
Yeah,
Now, go ahead.
yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Saley. I'm a youth facilitator for the Liberian Leadership Academy. So, the only thing I've ever heard about Providence or Perseverance Island so far coming up was how a cotton tree that used to be there but that is no longer there was 200 years old. That's the only thing that I learned about Providence Island, in addition to the ship Elizabeth that brought the first group of repatriates from the United States to the Providence Islands. Those are the two major things that I learned about Providence Island.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I would like to get to our students. So, our students, what did you hear about Providence Island growing up, or did you know any information about Providence Island when you guys were growing up? Go ahead. Go ahead, Zoda. Can you speak up a little bit louder?
Okay, I'm Enos of that one, that student that got the anyway. Um, from my high school days and to now, prior to coming to this class, I was told that there's a well on the island, and the well has been there for 200 years. And besides that, I was also told that all the structure on the island has been there for over 100 years plus.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm student Diana Mstaki from the Liberia Leadership Academy. All I was told back then during my high school days was that the first ship that probably said was the East Air and came straight at the President Island. And that's just it.
Yeah,
Can you repeat? Go ahead.
yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm student Isiaga Sharif. I when I was coming out, I learned a lot of things about Providence Island in my elementary school days. And one thing I learned was Providence Island was named after were given there was a name given to the Providence Island in the Goda Vernacular. They said it was Dazo. In the vernacular of the Goda tribe, they said it means land center of the water, Dazo. So that is one I capture, and also I get to learn that it was established in 1822, and also looking at the Gabriel Johnson Tucker Bridge, and also opposite the Providence Island. I get to learn that that bridge was named during the administration of Roland Aaron Tucker. It was also named after the person who did the design of the bridge. And that is named after the person called Gabriel Tucker. So that is what I can actually say for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So I want you to elaborate a little more. So this is something that I didn't know because the conventional history says that it's Dazo, not Dazoa. And so we've been struggling with that because I said there's no way this place was called Dazo. But now our master's student, Siaka, has said, what is it? What does it mean, center of the water? You said it means center of the water.
Land center of the water. Land center of the water.
That's powerful. So do you see the mystery's been solved? That makes so much more sense. So I want you guys to also look like you're on the show. All of y'all look like y'all sleeping. All y'all look like y'all don't want to be there. Quit being nervous, okay? Be as excited as you normally are in class because it's showing up on the camera. But thank you so much. I appreciate that. That actually was a missing piece. We'll talk about that some more. Jabari, can you go ahead and share the slides so they can present on that for us? Thank you.
Yes, and that leads us into our slideshow presentation that we will be having in a minute. So here we go. I'm going to be showing our slideshow presentation. Let me get that up for you guys. 1 second. Here we go. So here is our slideshow presentation. And so who sold the land? We're going to be diving into this. This is leading us into what really happened or the information that we have surrounding Cape Mesurado based on those sources. A deep dive into the Cape Mesurado Treaty of 1821. One of our facilitators, please read. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, they cannot see us. Give us 1 second. Give us 1 minute. Give us 1 second. Sorry.
We can see it just fine, Jabari.
Okay, my bad. I didn't think. I just wanted to be able to see it clearly. All right. To our facilitators, one of our openers.
Please enlarge the letters.
one of our students, to one of our students, can you read to one of our students?
Okay, so Jabari, I
I'll
want
read.
you to fix. Hello, can
Yeah,
you hear me? Okay.
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So what I want you to do when you're sharing, remember you got to zoom or go to full screen. Otherwise,
Mhm.
we'll see the. Okay, this is the first thing.
Yes.
All right.
All right, we're good. So for one of our facilitators, will you read the slideshow presentation? I'll get that up in a minute. Let me put that back. Here we go. One of y'all, please read this for us.
Did you start off at the beginning slide, Jabari?
Yeah, I started off at the beginning slide and then I went to this slide. So we're now back on here.
So it's very important for us to talk about what that means, the first slide. We need to have a
Okay.
little bit more of a conversation on that. So let's go back to it, please.
All right.
All right.
So who sold the land? A deep dive into the Cape Mazzarato land treaty of 1821. So based on what you guys have learned or past experience, who were the deciding factors? Who were the key players in this agreement with the land at Cape Mazzarato? Can you give some names of some people that you know that played a role into this agreement?
Okay. You can hear me clear, right?
Yes. One of our facilitators, our students, like to start us off with who were some of the deciding factors in the purchase, the Land Treaty 1821. Who were some of the people that played a part? What were some of the driving forces behind this agreement that eventually led to the creation of the repatriates going to Providence Island and then going forward from there?
Yeah, but to answer the first question that you talked about, you asked about who are the major key players in the selling of land. Yeah, Jabbar, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So in previous instances, we did a deep dive and discussion on who the major key players that were in charge of selling land on the Grain Coast was, and those key players were the King Peters of Mazzarato. Who are the King Peters of Mazzarato? We said that these were important and powerful people, elite people on the Grain Coast, who not only had dominion over most of the lands on the Green Coast, uh, but ran huge trade networks in Cape Mazzarato, from owning slaves to commodities. These people were the major key players on the coast, and not only did they dominate the land, but they also wouldn't allow anyone to just come on the land and settle there without gaining approval from them first. So when we talk about who sold land, we talk about these people because they left what we call it not only sovereignty, but they left economic sovereignty on the coast. They understood that owning land meant, meant owning and controlling the resources that were on the land.
Yes, so to add up to what my colleague just said, the question is who sold the land? So there are other records that stated that the Providence Island was being sold by John S. Mill to some Europeans. Yes, some documented records stated that. So we will dive into that later.
Yeah, and these documents, they are primary resource records, but there are two accounts, one from Hootie Ashman and one from Samuel E. Bacon. And then again, you have a third primary source record as a compilation of both of these first two mentioned records. But as we get deeper into the presentation, we'll give a further explanation on that.
Thank you. Now, I do have to ask you guys a more specific question. When they arrived, was this land purchase dealing at Cape Meserado specifically, or was it dealing with Providence Island? Was it just Cape Meserado, or was it Providence Island and specifically that they did first before continue on?
So it was initially having to do with Providence Island first. It mainly had to be Providence Island first. Cape Meserado basically came later on, and the reason for that was obviously because Providence Island wasn't very inhabitable. It was formerly a slave depot from the mid or late 1700s that later became um, that was later sold to the repatriates that came to look for somewhere to settle on the west coast of Africa. And the reason why why the Providence Island slave depot was out of business was due to the banning of the transatlantic slave trade. So the banning of the transatlantic slave trade rendered the Providence Island slave depot to be basically useless. There was no use for it to be used as a slave depot to sell slaves. But long story short, it was basically the seed that would later be, it was literally the seed that would become sold to later become Liberia.
Thank you. And that is an important note that needs to be emphasized. When we talk about the land treaty in 1821, before they get to Cape Meserado, it's Providence Island. Providence Island is the first stepping stone. And so that needs to be emphasized when we're talking about the land agreement is at Providence Island. Those were the Patriots. That's where the Patriots went, was Providence Island. And you brought up a man by the name of John S. Mills, Zone Pay, which is a very important figure because oftentimes when we talk about the land treaty, they were, or what is often told is, hey, they just had an agreement with these kings, and just the kings gave them the land, or there was some situation that happened, and the land was just given. And now, what you guys have been discussing, what you guys have emphasized, is that there was a lot more going on. That there was a person who actually owned land around Cape Meserado, Providence Island, John S. Mills, and he was one of the major driving forces behind this purchase agreement.
Mhm.
Great observations and great context to be given to this land treaty of 1821. So we're going to be transitioning into our next slide to go further into these driving forces.
Yeah, Jabari?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, would you be so kind as to just help us read this slide?
Okay,
Then we'll get into the further context of it.
no problem.
Thank
At the
you.
end of 1821 and the beginning of the following year, the colonists purchased the Meserado area. The American immigrants who were in Sierra Leone were picked up on board the two small goettes, which the colony owned, and disembarked on another small island at the mouth of the Meserado called Perseverance. The colonists had purchased this island through John Mill, the son of an English merchant but a native African, Meanwhile, the natives became concerned, and the decision to drive him and all strangers out of the country quickly came to fruition. Under the pretext of concluding an agreement, they invited these agents to a meeting in King Peter City. He went there, and they took him back as a prisoner. Publisher Paris au Bureau de la Revue du Monde. So let's break down this quote, and it's mentioning John S. Mill, somebody that we brought up. So, what is this source referring to? Let's discuss this. When he says, at the end of 1821, in the beginning of the following year, the colonists had purchased the Mesorado area. And it says the immigrants who were in Sierra Leone were picked up on board, and the two small goets, which the colony owned, they were at the mouth of the Mesorado. Can we break that down? Let's start at the very beginning. What are your thoughts about this? About the them purchasing the Mesorado area, them coming from Sierra Leone? What are your thoughts about this? What is it trying to tell y'all?
Okay. Okay. So from what we have learned, when the repatriates, why the repatriates decided to leave Sherbrooke. First of it, at Sherbrooke, where they were lodged, where they were staying by that time, the place was not healthy for them. So they started falling sick from malaria, dysentery, and rashes. So at some point, because most of them were actually dying, so they decided to find another suitable place that they think they could stay. And then they came on the alligator. So when they came at the Cape Messerado, they met with John S. Mill, an Englishman, and according to the record, it states that primary source state that John S. Mill, but then he was the owner of Providence Island. So, and then you had two Europeans that were being sent by the ACS in search of a place where the repatriates or settlers that will come can settle. And then while being in search of that particular place, they met John S. Mill. That was how he was at that time, like my colleague said, slave trade or transatlantic slave trade has been abolished. So no, there were no trading of slaves anymore across the Atlantic Ocean. So
Mhm.
he now not wanting, because that particular transatlantic slave trade has been abolished, he decided to sell out his property at Providence Island, and either Eric and Captain Stoughton being in search of a place for the repatriates. They met with him after they negotiated. He took them to compete. So another record I think is the Judy Ashman record state that one of the reasons he took them to compete was to negotiate for the land with either Eric and Captain Stoughton. So that particular essay is telling you the reason they left from Sherbrooke Island when they came to Cape Mesorado. What they actually came for, Captain Stoughton and Ida Air was in search of a place for the repatriate that were at Sherbrooke Island. And when they came, they met with John S. Mill, and he told them to compete so that they can negotiate for that particular place for where the settlers or repatriates will stay. Right.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes,
Now, now, as was just brought up as was mentioned, they brought up the fact that they said that meanwhile the natives became concerned, and the decision to drive all the strangers out of the country quickly came to fruition. Can you elaborate on that? And also unmute the facility. Can you unmute the students, please? Because
feedback.
okay.
Yeah. So when I looked at that, when me and my colleagues looked at that excerpt, basically why the indigenous or natives would start to develop such a fight was basically because of their was basically because of their terrible slave economic business that they were involved in. Basically, these guys were coming to establish another free town in their minds, and they did not want another free town within their vicinity. Because if they had another free town within their vicinity, that would be bad for their business. So that's why they were afraid. That's why they were frightened. They were not frightened because someone would come and take over their territory to get whatever kind of expansion that they thought that was going to happen. They were simply afraid because it meant that their business was going to be ruined.
How do you actually know that, Paul? I mean, you're saying this as if you had a conversation with them and they told you this. How do you know they were afraid of that?
The reason I know, like I said, time period and other background or context that we looked at. For example, you had JB Wynn. When JB went on the Nautilus, when they went 50 miles, not too far from Sherbrooke, to head to Cape Mount, they came across King Peter Careful, also known as Zulu. They wanted to get territory to settle the repatriates, but they changed their mind because they knew that he wasn't going to be in favor of it.
And Zolu Duma, let me ask, sorry to interrupt. So let's talk about King Peter Careful being Zolu Duma. He was located where?
Cape Mount.
So Zolu Duma was in what is now Cape Mount, and he was not, what did they say about him? Was he in favor of the Americans or not?
He was definitely not in favor of them.
Okay.
Yeah, because the reason why he was not in favor of them, because their presence was simply a hindrance to his slave business that he was carrying on in Cape Mount.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why I
So
say.
so you're saying that because of that's one of the reasons that you believe that there was a conflict, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, that makes a lot of sense. Now let's get back to the slides so now that Jabari's here. And let's focus on the slides so we can get through the show.
All right. So speaking of which, that brings us actually to our second point. So let me bring that up again. And here we go. We're going to be referring.
Yeah, Jabari, I want you to just handle the technical stuff. We'll flow through the slides, okay? Just handle the slides. Thank you so much. All right, so let's go to the next slide, please.
All right, here we go. Then.
All right. So Jabari, because you're on a computer, what we're going to do quickly is go through the treaty, because the purpose of this is to determine who actually sold the land, or if it was sold at all, or who sold it, correct? So let's stay on topic. This is the actual wording of the treaty. So Jabari, I'd like you to, if you don't mind, just read through this, because I don't think the others are able to see on the devices that they're on.
Sure, I can read it.
Thank you.
This was published in the Now Register October 19th, 1822. The following copy of the treaty entered into at Cape Mesurado is a curiosity well worth preservation. Agreement for the cessation and purchase of lands entered into the agents of the American Colonization Society and the King and Headman of Cape Mesurado. Known all men that this contract made on the 15th day of December in the year of our Lord 1821 between King Peter, King George, King Zoda, and King Long Peter, their princes and headmen of the one part, and Captain Robert F. Stockton and Eli Ayres of the other part witnesseth that whereas certain persons, citizens of the United States of America, are desirous to establish themselves on the west coast of Africa, and have invested Captain Robert F. Stockton and Eli Ayres with full powers to treat with and purchase from us, the said kings, princes, and headmen, certain lands. Vis-a-vis Dozo. Oh,
go ahead. Sorry.
The Doza Island, and also all that portion of land bounded north and west by the Atlantic, on the south and east by a line drawn in a southeast direction of the Mesurado River.
Excellent. Now, the island's name again, and I'm going to ask for Mr. Sharif to tell us the name of the island again and the meaning, and say so very loudly and clearly. Siaka?
Yeah,
What was the name of the island?
yeah. Like I said from my earlier stage, I said that the name is Dazo. Dazo is a Gola vernacular. Dazo.
And what is the meaning again?
It means land in center of the water.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, let's go to the next slide, Jabari. Read the next one. And oh, that picture, that illustration on the previous slide, by the way, is was drawn by a missionary from that went to Cape Mesurado and was working in the area. So this is somewhere probably on what we call Bushrod Island. So this is a scene that he drew, a village scene from Bushrod Island just before 1822. This was sketched in the year 1819. You can go to the next slide.
Right? We, the said kings, princes, and headmen, being fully convinced of the specific and just views of the citizens of America, and being desirous to reciprocate the friendship and affection expressed for us and our people, do hereby, in consideration of so much paid in hand, viz. 6 muskets, 1 box beads, 2 hogsheads tobacco, 1 cask gunpowder, 6 bars iron, 10 iron pots, 1 dozen knives and forks, 1 dozen spoons, 6 pieces of blue BAFTA, 4 hats, 3 coats, 3 pairs of shoes, 1 box pipes, 1 keg nails, 20 looking glasses, 3 pieces of handkerchiefs, 3 pieces calico, 3 canes, 4 umbrellas, 1 box soap, 1 barrel rum, and to be paid the following 3 casks tobacco, 1 box pipes, 3 barrels rum, 12 pieces cloth, 6 bars iron, 1 box bead, 50 knives, 20 looking guns, 10 iron pots, different sizes, 12 guns, 3 barrels, gunpowder, 1 dozen plates, 1 dozen knives and forks, 20 hats, 5 cask beef, 5 barrels pork, 10 barrels biscuit, 12 decanters, 12 glasses, tumblers, 50 shoes, forever cede and relinquish the above described lands with all thereto appertaining or belonging or reputed so to belong to Captain Robert F. Stockton and Eli Ayers, to have and hold the said premise for the use of these said citizens of America.
So presented to, so belonging. So to belong to Captain. So they're saying that this land is actually being purchased by Stockton and Ayers. Is that what I'm reading, guys?
Yes.
And they're buying it in order to give it to the use of people, but the people who are going to use it are not the buyers. I want you to look at that language very clearly. So Stockton and Ayers are supposedly buying it. I do want to also acknowledge that the photo that you see is of the original document, which was discovered by Dr. Carl Patrick Burroughs last year, or 2 years ago, I'm sorry. It was in the University of Chicago. It was the Chicago Museum archive, and they sent him basically everything they had on Liberia, and he took his time and tediously went through it and discovered that this original deed was in the possession of the museum. And so here is actual ink signatures of from that time period. This is the actual treaty. So this is very important. We can go to the next slide. Just want to tell you who that was that the reason we have this original document, we owe that to the meticulous research of Dr. Carl Patrick Burroughs. Let's go to the next slide.
Yep. And I just want to briefly say, notice what he says. He says, these said citizens of America. I wonder who he's referring to.
Right. Let's go to the next slide.
And we said, And we, the said kings and princes and headmen, do further pledge ourselves that we are the lawful owners of the above described lands without manner of condition, limitation, or other matter. The contracting parties pledge themselves to live in peace and friendship forever, and do further contract not to make war or otherwise molest or disturb each other. We, the kings, princes, and headmen, for a proper consideration by us received, do further agree to build for the use of the said citizens of America 6 large houses on any place selected by them within the above described tract of ceded land.
Perfect. So let's now go to our people on the ground. This is supposed to be signed by, you got X marks for the kings, and the picture on the left is a picture of an actual publication from the year 1822. So this is published a few months after the treaty was signed, and clearly is being published based on what Dr. Eli Ayers presented to the world. So this treaty wasn't only published in the United States, it was published in the UK. This news went all around the world because it is actually the first actual treaty for Cape Mesurado. The British have been signing treaties all over the place, and Cape Mesurado has always refused to sign treaties for land. This is the first time because Cape Mesurado had always refused to sign treaties for land. So all around the Cape, you know, you go to Sierra Leone, you go to the Gambia, there were treaties. Sherbro, there's treaties at Cape Coast, there's treaties at Lagos, you know, at Accra, but there's no treaty at Cape Mesurado for reasons that Paul stated earlier. What were those reasons, Paul?
Yeah. Those reasons, like I said, the king. Yeah, just a second. Yeah, okay. Like I said, one of those reasons was economic sovereignty reasons. They didn't want anyone to control the trade that was happening at Cape Mesurado, and the Cape
Who is
Mesurado was
they? Who are the they that didn't want anyone to control the trade? You said they. Who are they?
they are the Europeans. And to
So
give
the
you
Europeans didn't want anyone to control trade at Cape Mesurado?
no, the sovereign Africans at Cape Mesurado did not want the Europeans to come in to control the trade.
Okay, you have to be specific because otherwise I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah, apologies.
So say it again. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the sovereign Africans on the Green Coast, being Cape Mesurado, did not want the Europeans to control the trade at Cape Mesurado.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is why this was a big deal and this was published all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you see who all signed.
Yeah, we see
Yes.
who also.
So Long Peter went to school. He could read and write. He spoke English. Why do you think he signed with his X mark? But we'll go to the next slide. You can address it later. I think that's a little strange that he would put an X mark when he was literate. Let's go to the next slide. So what are we looking at here? Zota, Zomopev, anyone? Diana, what are we looking at? It's a map, a very old map from around 1824.
Yeah.
What's in the circle there?
Yeah, so we are looking at Providence Island and Gomas Island.
Okay, so we're looking at Gomez and Providence Island because now it's being called Providence because it's 1824, but Providence was formerly Dazo Island, right?
Yes.
Okay, or Dazoa Island as Ayers spelled it, Dazoa. The land in the center of the water. Let's go to the next slide, please. Go ahead, Jabari. So before you come in, Jabari, what was happening at Cape Mesurado? Kra, Zota, Diana, we haven't heard, and Morrison, we haven't heard much from you guys. What was happening at Cape Mesurado right before ACS came? What happened 1813? What big thing happened before, just before? What were they doing there?
Yeah, let me come in. Kid Mas, I'm Kurate Kura. So at Kid Maserado, the selling of human beings was what happening there. Human beings were being sold at Kid Maserado.
And how do we know that human beings were being sold at Cape Meserado?
Yeah, from previous essence been reading, some human beings were being sold. In fact, it was a slave depot where people were being sold.
Does anyone know how we know that? I mean, Cross saying that, but how do we know that people were being sold there? Zota, how do we know?
Okay, so
Because
we
let me come in for just a quick second before you answer. They don't teach us this in school, right? Did any of you learn in school that they were selling human beings at Cape Meserado?
No.
Then how do you know? Zota, go ahead.
okay. So the first thing is at Maserado, you had kings that were there, and then they rejected those people coming to settle because they didn't want another free town coming into their territory where they were using to sell people. And then secondly, at that prevalent island, you have slave barracks that were there as well.
How do you know? Paul Morrison, how do you know?
Yeah, well, setting your mind. All right, continue.
I mean,
Yes.
telling me this without
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to tell me what happened. I'm asking you, how do you know what you know?
Yeah. So there were documented records that show that people were being enslaved and from the bit of sale also and primary resources.
There were bills of sale that listed Providence Island or Dazwa Island, Cape. Anyone else have any? I mean, that's good. Yes, there are documented, but be specific. Let's go to Paul.
Yeah, so in the year of 1813, this is just a few years after the banning of the transatlantic slave trade. Yeah, in 1813, just a few years after the banning of the transatlantic slave trade, you had two slave traders by the name of McGrin and Boswick, if I'm corrected. They
McQueen.
purchased slaves from John S. Mill, and after purchasing those slaves, there were a bill of sale, or we simply call it receipt. And those same receipt would later be used to prosecute Boswick and McGrin, who were purchasing slaves at Cape Meserado after the transatlantic slave trade was supposedly banned.
Okay. What? Any other records besides that? That's a good one. Any other records that would point to the slave trade? What about Voyage's database that has all the slave trading records? That's what I expected Zota to explain because he knows how to use the database. Right? There were slaves being sold because the ship manifest and the Voyage's database shows all of the ships that went to Cape Meserado to purchase human beings. Correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Not all, but the records, the surviving records that still survive to this day. Okay, now we can go ahead, Jabari. Please read the slide.
Bostock and Mason's compound was on the banks of the St. Paul River, a name bestowed by Portuguese sailor Pedro da Sintra, who happened to first see it on the feast day of St. Paul. In 1813, an ally of theirs had his slave Barracoon on that small island, and within days of Ball loading Za aboard a slave ship, hundreds of their captives would be hidden there.
Excellent. So that's good. Let's go to the next slide. I think the map, for everyone to know, it kind of pointed out both maps, the one you're on now and the one before, point out where some of these slave barracoons were behind the Cape. So the Cape is facing the Atlantic Ocean. Behind the Cape is where they have all the human beings in bondage waiting to be sold. and different people. Mason was an American slave trader. Boswick McQuinn, British. John Sterling Mill was born in Africa and had a British father. You also have Bytown, which was an active slave trading port. So the control of the Cape was still in the hands of these kings, of the sovereign Africans, but they allowed these Europeans to utilize these outposts for the purpose of their business, because they too were receiving revenue from this business. So as Paul had talked about earlier, you still have the King Peters controlling this place, their descendants, but they're partnering with Europeans. Let's go to the next slide, please.
The purchase of the Mesorado territory was effected in December of 1821, of which transaction a particular account was published by the Colonization Society a few months afterward. The tract ceded included Cape Mesorado and the lands forming nearly a peninsula between the Mesorado and Junk rivers, about 36 miles along the coast, with an average breadth of about 2 miles. For 100 years, the principal powers of Europe had in vain tried to gain possession of Cape Mesorado. France and England had made repeated offers to the head chiefs occupying the territory, who steadily and invariably refused to part with even 1 acre. Indeed, the kings were known to be extremely hostile to the whites, always rejecting their most advantageous proposals. Thus was this territory providentially reserved for Africa's own descendants far away in
Exile.
exile.
So this last sentence, thus was this territory providentially reserved for Africa's own descendants far away in exile. So because they refused for many, many generations to cede their territory to anyone, any European, it was then preserved, whether knowingly or unknowingly, for Africa's own descendants. Next slide. So what are we looking at here, Lovely? What are we looking at?
So this is a letter. Yeah, from John.
It's not a letter. Paul talked about what it was. It's fine if you don't know. Paul, what is it that we're looking at?
So we're basically looking at a treaty or bill of sale.
Okay. And tell me about the treaty or bill of sale that we're looking at. Who is it? Who wrote it? Whose handwriting is it?
So that's John S. Mill handwriting.
John Sterling Mill.
Yeah, John Sterling Mill handwriting on the treaty or bill of sale.
And who was John Sterling Mill again?
He was a slave trader who was the proprietor of Providence Island.
So he was the proprietor of Dazoa Island.
Yeah, Dazoa Island, Providence Island.
Dazoa Island, Providence Island. He was the proprietor. So John Sterling Mill, being a proprietor, just meaning that he had his shop set up there, right?
Yeah.
And he's writing, this document was taken into evidence by the British against Boswick and McQuinn, who were 2 British citizens that were selling slaves at Cape Mesorado, as we already discussed. The reason this still exists in 2024 is because it was taken into evidence at the British courts at Freetown against these 2 slave traders that were still selling human beings after the transatlantic slave trade had been abolished. So this was one of the pieces of evidence that they used to convict Boswick and McQueen. Exactly. Why did they not convict John Sterling Mill, but they convicted or King Peter or or King Zolta? Why didn't they convict the people who were conducting the slave trade that were Africans at Bushrod Island or mulatto like John S. Mill? Why didn't they convict them? Why did they only convict Boswick and McQueen? Paul,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
didn't
So
they convict? Why didn't they convict the sovereign Africans? Why did they only convict Boswick and McQueen?
okay, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so at that time, the transatlantic slavery was already over. So slavery was taking place on the coast, but not across the coast. So the two guys in question were Europeans that came to Portuguese to travel across the Atlantic.
No, that's not correct. That's
Yeah.
not correct. They lived at Cape Meserado. Boswick and McQueen lived at Cape Meserado. So they didn't travel across the ocean to sell slaves. That was their business. We already showed on the map where they had their operations set up. The reason they were convicted is because they were British citizens, and the British had dominion over their own citizens. The British could convict their own subjects. They could not convict the sovereign Africans in court because they had no jurisdiction over them or their land. This is very important in the foundational principles of Liberia, which is why coming forward, the British are now giving us a very hard time. The reason they were able to convict Boswick and McQueen is because they were British. And though John Sterling Mill's father was British, he himself did not consider himself British, and nor did the government consider him to be British. Boswick and McQueen were British subjects. The Africans, including John Sterling Mill, who was considered an African, though his father was English, were sovereign. They had no authority over them and their dealings on their own land. But they could convict British people for doing wrong on African land. And they were convicted and sentenced. But all of the African slave traders on our coast were not. So the transatlantic slave trade is illegal, and it is illegal for British and Americans to be engaged in transatlantic slavery. Let's go to the next slide. And I want you to take note of the signatures. So now we're going back to the two documents, original documents. One, the one on the right, which is John Sterling Mill's signature from the year 1813. The document on the left is supposed to be from the 15th of December, 1821. Dr. Eli Ayers says that this is his handwriting, and he says that all of these people signed this document. And the reason why am I comparing these two signatures, Paul? Why am I looking at handwriting from the 1800s?
The reason why we're comparing these two signatures is because they're different. They look different, which led us to suspect further.
Paul, people are watching. They don't know what you're talking about. So please be specific.
Yes. So specifically, if we look at, for example, the signatures of John S. Mill on the right and on the left, they don't look the same. But if we look at the signature of Eli Ayers on the same document on the left, we could see that they looked almost exactly the same, which led us to come to a conclusion that this document was forged by
You
Eli
and
Ayers.
whom is us? Are you speaking for yourself? I want you to speak for yourself and what you're looking at. I want you to talk about your own thoughts.
Yeah,
Who is
from my
us? Talk about what you're observing and let other people speak for themselves.
yeah. So according to my observation, when I observe the document on the left and I look at Eli Ayers' handwriting, it led me to suspect that he could have possibly forged this document. And what caught my attention again was John S. Mill's signature. They did not align or they did not look the same.
And how did you conclude that they don't look the same? I mean, I can tell you without any question that the document on the left that Dr. Burroughs discovered in the archives, that document is authentic from that time period. So that is definitely Dr. Ayers that wrote this. I mean, with very little doubt. So you're saying that Dr. Ayers, the signature of John Sterling Mill on the 1821 document is different from the British court records, how they present his signature on the document that was used to convict Boswick and McQuinn.
Yes, it's different.
So can
So,
I come
Mokel,
in?
what do you think?
Okay, so the document on the right, you will see that John S. Mill spelled out his full name, Jones Scriven Mill,
Sterling.
John Sterling Mill. And when you come to the one in the left, you will see that his name is not spelled out. It's just Joh and John S. Mill, which
Well, is
makes
that enough for us to be questioning? I mean, maybe sometimes he wrote his whole name out, sometimes he didn't.
so for me, after seeing these two signatures,
Mm-hmm.
I said to myself that this particular signature of John S. Mill in the left and the one on the right is not the same. Then I went further to look at other signatures and the writing uh, at the top. So if you look at, from my own observation, if you look at Eli Ayers' signature and you look at the writing on top, you will see that they are very similar. So I came up with my own conclusion and said, because I know this is just half of the document, but if you start from the top of it, you will see the same way Ida Aries' signature is being spelled out here, is being written here. It is the same way it is being written up in the document saying Ida Aries and Captain Stockton. So the signature is very similar and familiar. And another thing is that the kings that sign the signature, you cannot tell me, you cannot convince me that all of them had the same penmanship, all of them had the same way of signing.
Of
Remember,
writing the letter X, you mean?
yeah, X, of writing the letter X, even the letter M and Y, I mean King, king, all of the kings were being written the same way, the
Well,
X.
so let me come in for a second. Eli Ayers wrote their names and told them to put their X marks. So that's normal. He is supposed to write king this, king that. He was writing out their names because the assumption here is none of them can read and write. But we do know that King Long Peter,
Korean right.
King Peter Careful, I'm sorry, not Careful, but King Peter Brumley could read and write,
Yes.
as well as John Sterling Mill. John Sterling Mill could read and write. King Peter Brumley could read and write. So why is John Sterling Mill writing his name and not X mark, but King Peter Brumley writing X mark? That's very strange, knowing what we know about both men,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that for me is strange. But what I'm saying is writing out their names, if they could not read and write, makes sense. The only thing the kings are supposedly writing here is the X. And you're saying that the X's all look the same.
All look the same.
Anyone else? Thank you, Zomopa. Anyone else have different points or anything about this issue that was being raised? Okay, so that's pretty compelling. I see some discrepancies too, and I find it also strange that Ayers' handwriting is exactly the same as the handwriting for John Sterling Mill and Captain Stockton. I also agree that it's strange that all of these kings write the letter X the same way, because the X is definitely looks like it's all written by the same person. Because if you can't read and write and you're writing the letter X, one person might do it better than someone else. They're not going to all look the same. And then for me, I just find it strange that Long Peter would be writing an X when he could read and write and speak English, and he was literate. That's strange. John Sterling Mill, also born in Africa, literate. Maybe because he was a mulatto, they let but clearly the signature that he has from the British court records from 1813 is nothing like the signature on the document that Ayers produced. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is just a picture of a slave barracoon, and we can end on the last slide, Jabari. Go to the next one. So let's talk about this a little bit. What are your thoughts? I mean, my thoughts are kind of raises the flag. We probably need to do some digging, but what does everyone else think here? Anyone want to conclude today? Who sold the land?
So, from my own perspective, I want to believe that if Eli Ayers, to my own understanding, forged that document, it basically means to me that no one sold them the land, or no one sold him the land. Because if it wasn't forged, if it was authentic, then that means yes, the land was sold and the purchase was made. And if we look at previous context regarding the kings of Macerata and how they didn't really like to do treaty with anyone, most specifically strangers like Europeans on the Cape Macerata, it also backs up my thoughts of the document being further forged. Because let's say the kings did not want to sell the land at Cape Macerata to these men. And it's possible it led Eli Ayers to take an alternative route by forging that fake document. So that's just my thought about it. This is just my own thought.
Okay.
Okay. Go, yeah, mute.
So let me give my thought to that. I believe the kings sold the land. One thing I'm not certain about is the purchase order, in the sense that the money that was given or whatever was given in exchange of the land is sold. Because if you look at that writing, it's all one person who wrote that, and you wrote the king's name. But besides that, even if the X was been written by the kings, it could not be the same. But if the kings were not the one who sold the property, they won't allow the people to settle on it. Another fact. Because the fact that they were not allowing them to sell it to anyone prior to Aries coming, meaning they were not willing to allow anybody to go there. So the fact that the people were able to come and settle there, meaning there were transactions that took place, that they agreed for people to come and settle there. What we can
So
establish is
let me ask you a question. Sorry to interrupt. Let's talk about what you said before you go to another point.
okay.
Let's settle your first point. Your first point was that you believe they sold it because they were allowed to settle. Where exactly did they settle? When they got off the Alligator, they were transferred from what is now in Sierra Leone to where did they go?
They went to the Providence Island.
They didn't go settle on the Cape. They went and settled in the swampy island. Think about it.
Yeah.
So if the kings had sold the land, why they didn't just let them settle at the Cape? As the treaty talks about. The treaty is focused on the land right at the Cape. It's also focused on those two small islands and mentioned Dazwa and Gomez Islands, right? But it was mostly about the Cape. That's why they say Treaty of Cape Macerata. So they're talking about Crown Hill. They're talking about the place that is now, Center Town, Monrovia. So if they actually had purchased that, why would they have been stuck on Providence Island for 4 months?
And another thing we could think about, but yeah, they still came back on the Mercy Island when they were facing difficulty with the water issue, and they were there. So how did they get there too?
Didn't they have to make another arrangement to get there? They had to beg, and they felt sorry for them, and they let them there. When they went to the Cape, that's when they raised war against them. Right?
Okay, maybe.
No, it's not about maybe. That's what is written. That's what they documented. That people could read and write. They wrote their own story. They were not there with Eli Ayers to negotiate land. They only Ayers and Stockton supposedly were present. I'm not even convinced Stockton was present. Ayers goes back and says, "Here's the paper. The people sign the paper. Y'all carry the people to get there, and they're relegated to Providence Island, not the dry highlands of the Cape." And even for them to leave Providence Island, they had to negotiate for that. So if everything was in the property of ACS, if this treaty is legitimate, why? I mean, even today, that Providence Island has been joined with Gomez Island to make a bigger structure. If you're bringing me to settle somewhere and I got Crown Hill or that place, I would choose Crown Hill. Think about it.
So it bring me back to the question that it says that President Island or the Gourmet Island were not important to the case. I was so that anybody settle there too. Is that what it
Providence
says?
Island and Gomez Island were under the control of slave traders. They were not using the place. When they abolished the slave trade, John S. Mill had abandoned the island. Nobody was making farm there.
So who gave it to Joyous Mills?
The people who were benefiting from the slave trade.
That's what I'm saying. So if Joy abandoned the place and gone, and other people
He
can
had
settle
not gone. He had not gone. He still owned the houses there. Did you listen to the treaty when it was being read? John S.
yeah.
Mill still owned the property, the houses on the island, and he said they could use the houses, even though they were in a dilapidated state. So John S. Mill, it was basically an abandoned place.
Hmm. If the land was legit, why would you be relegated to the basically the worst of the worst land? Like that's basically what it is. Dilapidated, used to be former slave barracoon, aka the land that's not really good for anything.
So you have a slave barracoon that there's no village on, nobody got time for it. John S. Mill still is the proprietor of the place. When the people came, they had nowhere to settle. John said, "Okay, y'all be here." If you have a treaty for some place and you arrive with the repatriated people, why would there be an argument like that? Any other questions?
Yes. So just to give my thoughts on what we have discussed, I would say this from what I've been learning and what I've been reading, primary resources that I've been reading. The kings did not sell the land. John S. Mill, he himself was not the owner of the land. Like it was stated in one of the treaty, he was just a proprietor. So from everything we've read, from I think it was the fourth slide that Jabari read, I think the one of the reasons I'm assuming at this point, one of the reasons he either areas actually flushed that document was because when he was sent in search of a place for a land, he was given good sum of money. So and with the items that were named and being submitted to the king, that is kings and hairmen that he said he submitted them to for this particular Cape Mesorado. I think he just wanted to justify how he used the money that was given to him. But we've been discussing this countless time, and records have been proving that the kings of Cape Mesorado did not, and they were never willing to sell the land. Cape Mesorado, for you to even come to say you want to trade at Cape Mesorado was problem. They will always see you at the back so that they can be receiving their taxes. They were always send you
Exactly.
at the
That's a
back.
good point. The
Yeah,
King Peter in 1725, King Peter, Lord of Mesorado, said that they could always settle behind the Cape in those swamp islands to set up their barracoons or their factories. If they wanted to have a store or any kind of trading post, it needed to be at the back of the Cape. Which
yes,
is why when you look at those old maps, all the slave barracoons were at the back of the Cape.
exactly.
That place was very important to them. Now, it did come to a point when the slave trade was shut down, and we can talk about this next episode. We'll focus on why did the Cape become a legitimate home for the repatriated people? But it's very important to acknowledge that this was not something that, it's rumored that they went there at gunpoint and took the land. That is not true. Nobody went there at gunpoint and took land from anybody. They were outmanned and outgunned. They didn't have the power to do that. I mean, these people were slave traders. They had cannons, they had muskets, they had power, they had manpower. There was no way a couple of guys could just go there, like some cowboy movie from America in the 1950s, and just control people who had not been controlled for centuries. It's not possible. That's some very fantasy stuff. So no, nobody went and put a gun at anybody's head, as people have rumored to say. There's no primary source record supporting that story. But even the primary source records that are supporting a trade are questionable. There may be another explanation for why the signatures don't match. Maybe somebody else rewrote this document, which is highly unlikely. But I tell you for sure, that is not John S. Mill's signature on that document.
Exactly so.
And he was supposed to be the witness. So the witness's signature is forged. Definitely. But let's go ahead and conclude. I want to thank everybody for your time today, and you stayed a lot later than you should have. I want to give a big shout out to George Wallace and Ride Me for allowing us to use their office today. Please, 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 if you need car service, transportation service, Ride Me is the place to connect with. Their professional, organized, and affordable logistics. So Ride Me. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Jabari, Basabari.
It was great being here. I enjoyed it.
Gullah Geechee Basabari. All right.
Hey, we got somebody tuning in from ATL. Shout out Morris May. Hey, ATL in the house.
We've been in the house, Jabari.
I know we in the house. I know, but it's great to see.
Are there any quick comments you want to read before we stop? Any comments from anyone that would be important?
No, we have. We got one of our great friends over. He said, "Long live Liberia," and he said, "Sounds like the devils like to fake other people's signatures and do their nonsense."
Yep, that's what it looks like. So that could be a potential reason for the conflict, Zota, and we're going to explore that later. But I know it's getting late in Liberia. Thank you for your time. Everybody get home safely and be blessed.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye.